Hello, everyone. So, chapter one, we covered the science of human development. Chapter two, we looked at the grand theories in this field. And for chapter three, we will start with a little bit of biology and then move into genetics. We know that all living things are made up of cells, and human beings are basically made up of trillions of cells. Each and every one of those cells contains instructions that guide the cell on what to do and what to become. These instructions are stored on what we call DNA. So, as you watched in the video, what is DNA? DNA is short for deoxyribonucleic acid, which is basically a mega molecule that is basically the map or the blueprint for any living thing. The job of DNA is basically to instruct amino acids on how to line up in order to produce proteins, and proteins will go on to pretty much carry the functions of the cell, whether it is to produce another cell or to transport chemicals or to collect into other cells and become a tissue of a particular organ and so forth. So, where is DNA? Zooming in on a cell, we will see that inside the cell there is a nucleus, and inside the nucleus we will see that the DNA that is extremely long, it's a very long strand. It's measured at about 5 feet. Of course, 5 feet might not sound very long, but when you know that you have about 50 to 75 trillion cells in your body, and each and every one of those cells has to contain that 5-foot strand of DNA, you can begin to understand why it lives its life coiled up into bundles that are called chromosomes. So within the nucleus, we will see 23 pairs of chromosomes. Chromosomes, if we zoom in on what is a chromosome is basically a wound up DNA strand. And if we unwind that strand of DNA, you can begin to see the double helix. And the double helix is basically those pairs of amino acids that we talked about that are basically going to be the basic building block of life. And based on how they're arranged is how the proteins are made, and the proteins are basically are going to develop or carry the functions of the cell. All right, so for the sake of our course, I don't want you to really worry about the details. I want you to know very important things, and that is DNA is inside the cell, inside the nucleus. DNA is basically inside the nucleus, wrapped up into bundles of chromosomes. So chromosomes are basically DNA. And how many chromosomes are there? There are 23 pairs of chromosomes in every cell. All right, moving on to chromosomes, a little bit of details. It's a long strand of DNA. It carries the genetic information of the cell. And as we said, there are 23 pairs, which means there are 46 chromosomes. So this is a very important part that you need to remember. It's not only a test question, but it is something that will come up a lot as we progress into the semester. So 46 chromosomes arranged into 23 pairs that are very similar. Each pair is very similar in the way that the genetic material is arranged on each one of them. Of course, one chromosome comes from the mother and the other one comes from the father, and that's why there are pairs for each set. Now, the 23rd pair is the one that you need to remember and will be the only pair that is different. So the 1 through 22 are similar. The 23rd pair is what we call the sex chromosome. And based on what type we have is the sex of the baby. So if it was an XY chromosome, the baby is a male. If it is an XX chromosome, it is a female. So wrapping it up, chromosomes are basically DNA wound up into these bundles. If we were to unwind it, you will look and see this double helix of amino acids. How many chromosomes do we have? We have 23 pairs or 46 chromosomes. 22 of them are very similar, and the 23rd pair is what decides the sex of the baby. All right, so we're going to zoom in further into one chromosome, and then we look at what it's made up of. Well, we already said that it's made up of DNA. All right, well, a small section of a chromosome is of course a piece of DNA, and what we call when we say you have your mother's genes, or you must your personality is just like your dad, or something like that. This is because genetic material is basically carried on the genes. So what is a gene? A gene is a section of a chromosome, a section that is in charge of a particular trait or function. So on the chromosome, one of those 23 pairs, there are different sections that are in charge of different functions. This section, for example, on the, let's say, the 21st pair, is in charge of the shape of your nose, or this section is in charge of how your eyes are going to be shaped, things like that. So the gene for eye shape, the gene for nose shape, the gene for height, or the gene for eye color, whatever, those are basically sections of a chromosome. So a gene is a small section of a chromosome that contains the instructions to manufacture the protein needed to express that certain trait. So based on whatever you have there is how you're going to look, or how that gene is going to express itself. All right? How many genes do humans have? We have about 20 to 25,000 genes. Next, we talk about a little bit more detail of what can a gene be looking like. Not all genes are the same. Genes have different functions. One gene can be in charge of the eye shape, we said. One gene can be in charge of the eye color. One gene can be in charge of whether or not you can digest certain food. Now, the different variations of the gene expression, so one gene can have this shape, one gene can have this shape of a nose, and one gene can be this, and one gene can be that. Those different variations of a one particular gene, it's still the one in charge of nose shape, but the different variations is what we call alleles. So an allele is a variation in a gene that makes it different than another one. And that's why your genetic makeup is different than mine, because you might have a different allele of that gene than the one I have. The effects of the variations will vary, because if I have a gene that is simply a different shape of the nose, that's not a big deal. I just have a different shaped nose. But if I ended up with a gene that is actually that has the liability of being more at risk for developing a particular disease, or having diabetes, or having any of those syndromes, or things that are more lethal, things that are more threatening, then the effect of the gene is not just a simple thing. So why is it important to know if you are a carrier, for example, of sickle cell gene? Well, because then we can know how to protect you against that liability that you have inherited in your genetic makeup. All right, next we'll talk about the variations, but in different perspective. So one term that I want you to know is genome. A genome is basically the set of instructions that are needed to make a particular member of a species. The human species, which is the Homo sapiens, have been studied for many years by many scientists, and finally in around 2001 is when we were able to figure out or decipher the human genome. The human genome was found to be a total of about 20,500 genes in total. So 20,500 genes put together are basically what makes a human being. How are they arranged? What kind of alleles did you get in yours is why you look different than me, than the next person. Now, here's the cool thing. We are 99.9% similar in our genetic makeup. That 1% is what makes you completely different than your neighbor, than a person who lives in a different continent. So the similarities amongst us as human beings is enormous. The differences are very minute. All right, another two important terms to keep in mind is the concept of genotype and phenotype. All right, pay close attention to this, because a genotype is basically your inherited set of everything. You inherited a set of, let's go back to this one. You inherited a set of chromosomes, 23 pairs of chromosomes that carry different alleles, different genetic expressions, okay? Now, whether the gene that you have inherited from mom and the gene that and the similar one that you've inherited from dad are both going to be expressed or not depends on a interaction between the two genes, okay? So the one that you got from mom, the one that you got from dad. And we will look at the different type of interactions between genes, but the result is your phenotype. So you might have inherited some genetic portions or alleles of a particular trait, but they do not show up on you. Why? Because there must have been some interaction between the genes that maybe blocked it from being expressed, or together they came up with a completely new variation, and that is how it was expressed in you. So your genotype is everything you inherited. It's in the inside of you. No one can see it. There are a lot of things that some of them might be expressed and we can see it, and some are not. But your phenotype is the observable ones. It's the characteristics that we can actually see. It's your appearance, your personality, your intelligence, and a lot of other traits. So here's an example in the eye color, even though the eye color is not as simple as we might think. It's not a matter of you got this color and from mom and this color from dad and this is the product. But this is just to simplify what phenotype and genotype mean. All right, so you're in your genotype, all right, you might have inherited a gene for blue and brown. However, because of the fact that blue is a recessive trait and brown is a dominant trait, you came out with brown eyes. However, inside, in your genetic makeup, you still carry the blue. So maybe 2 generations later, you might have a grandchild who is blue-eyed, or maybe your child, your own child, comes with blue eyes, even though you have brown eyes and your partner has brown eyes. So this is why your genetic makeup determines pretty much how your phenotype is going to look, and it could actually determine how the phenotype of your offsprings might even look like. So for this person to be blue-eyed, they might have they should have inherited blue from both sides of their parents. So they, as you can see, it is lowercase b, lowercase b. So that's how the genotype is. The phenotype is blue. So they have b, lowercase b, which is an abbreviation of the blue, and from the mom and from the dad. However, for this person, if you see that they have brown eyes, then there are multiple possibilities. One is that they have inherited both brown from mom and dad, or they might have inherited a brown from dad and a blue from mom, but because brown is dominant, then it only showed as brown. But they're a carrier of the blue, so that when they have children, they might, if their partner is also a carrier or has blue in their genetic makeup, they might have an offspring that is blue-eyed. So this is how your genotype might differ than your phenotype. You might be carrying a particular trait, but not necessarily expressing it in the phenotype. All right, so as I mentioned, that the interaction between genes can be very interesting because it determines how the gene is going to express itself. Almost all human traits are both multifactorial and polygenic. The meaning: polygenic means poly and genes, many genes. So traits are influenced by many genes. An example would be your height. You are never the product of simply mom is 5 feet, dad is 6 feet, and you're either going to be 6 feet or 5 feet. No, it doesn't work that way. There are multiple genes that interact in order for you to be the height that you are. As a matter of fact, 400 genes interact to get the result of your height. So it's not as simple as that one small section on the chromosome that is in charge of height. It's a lot of different genes that interact together and produce your final height. Another thing about traits is that they are multifactorial, meaning that traits are affected by many factors. Some of them are genetic, your nature, and some of them are environmental, your nurture. And height is also one of those traits. So your height is determined by 400 genes, but it is also determined by how well nourished you are, for example. So take two twins, identical twins, and have one be raised in a well nourished environment with lots of sun, lots of calcium, vitamin D, good exercise, all of the things that could aid the development of their body and their muscles and their bones. And take the identical twin and have him be raised in an environment where he is malnourished, sleep deprived, might not be exposed to the sun, all of those things that could alter the genetic expression. Remember, epigenetics, all of these can alter the genetic expression of his height, which had they both been in the same environment, they might both be at the same height. But because height is a multifactorial trait, then they might not be the same height if you were to compare them with each other. Now, gene to gene interaction, remember we said that it's not as simple as you inherited those two genes so they were going to be expressed. No, sometimes they're expressed in a different way. They could either be collectively expressed as a result of additive heredity. So this is where, like we said, the height is the product of 400 genes. So genes with effects that add up to influence the phenotype. So the genetic information from moms and the genetic information from dads combine together to produce the final product. Another example is your hair curliness, the texture of your hair, or the color of your skin. It's not as simple as mom is white, dad is black, then baby is going to be either black or white. No, it's a combination. It's an additive heredity. So the new color, the new skin color is going to come as a combination of those two interactive genes. The other way that genes interact with each other is through what we call dominant recessive heredity. And this is the one that usually they teach in probably in middle school or in high school when you took your biology 101. You learned about the Mendel rules, and you did your Punnett square, and you tried to figure out, a mom with blue eyes or brown eyes and a dad with blue eyes or brown eyes, and what kind of children they might have. So this is where we talk about this interaction of dominant recessive. So dominant genes are going to be influential and they will cover or mask the recessive gene. So if they are present, they're going to show on the phenotype. There is no way you can mask them. If they are not present, then the recessive one, if we have two recessive ones, then you can see the recessive expression. So here's an example with the eye color, just to simplify it, even though eye color, as I said, is polygenic. But here's an example of a parent who is, as you can see, brown is dominant, blue is recessive, so they definitely have brown eyes. Here's another parent with brown eyes, and they also have the recessive blue. So together they will have 25% of their children are going to be blue-eyed in the genotype, BB, and blue-eyed in the phenotype, they're brown-eyed. And they will have 50% of children that will have brown eyes in the genotype. So they are, in the phenotype, they are blue-eyed, brown-eyed when you look at them. But inside genetic makeup, they're carriers of the blue gene. then they will also have a 25% of having a blue-eyed child. And that's where people go, oh, well, how did that happen? Well, that happened because mom and dad are carriers of the blue, and they have a chance of having a 1 in 4 children, 25% of their offsprings can have blue eyes. And this is the dominant recessive interaction when it comes to genes.